Bristol, not Connecticut, but England in the United Kingdom. Bristol is about a 2-hour drive west of London, but is a formidable city in its own right with a population of nearly 500,000. From what I've learned, it is a bustling college town with many young, energetic leaders, one of whom is our guest today. We have the privilege to speak with someone inside City Hall who works on sustainability day in and day out. I am most excited because we are both young leaders in our 20s. Please welcome Allan Macleod. Allan started his time in Bristol as an undergraduate student and rolled straight into a master's degree, during which he worked on a student consulting project for the municipal government. He was so good that they asked him to stay on full time. That was 3 years ago, and he's still there with the title of SDG Research and Engagement Associate. Allan was key to carrying out Bristol's 2019 voluntary local review, and he continues to share Bristol's experience with like-minded cities all over the world. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Allan. I want to jump right in and ask you, as the Sustainable Development Goals Research and Engagement Associate in Bristol, what does your job entail?
So my role's a bit of a strange one. It's split between the university and the city council. Originally, it was split with an extra role as well, working with the Bristol Green Capital Partnership, but now it's sort of mostly focused on the university and the city council. But the original role and the reasoning for the role is around engagement on the one hand, and that's engagement with within the city, so with the city council, but it's also then engagement with the wider city and with city stakeholders. So that is engagement twofold: city council, but then also with a network of organisations that we have in the city called the SDG Alliance. And that network has grown to be about 150 odd different stakeholders, ranging from community groups to businesses to academia and city council and all sorts of other not-for-profit organisations as well. So it's a real range of different organisations that are involved in that network. And that's the engagement side of my work. But then on the research side, I've been working with an academic at the University of Bristol, Dr. Sean Fox, and he and I have been working to think about how localization can occur in a city context and how the localization of the SDGs can be worked out in a city context.
That's so exciting. And I'll come back in later questions about how you share your research with other cities to help then do just that, which is localize the sustainable development goals for their reality. And talking about Bristol still as a city, it was named the European Green Capital back in 2015. What makes Bristol a green city?
I think, well, just a bit of a background to some of that. There was a long process in getting to the point of being a green capital. A good, I think, about 7 or 8 years of partnership development and planning and applications to develop the city and to work towards that. It's, as a city, it's actually got a lot of green space on the one hand, but it's also really well connected to some of the environmental movements in the southwest, and as relatively environmentally focused as a city and forward thinking in terms of its work. And recently we've been one of the first cities in the world to declare a climate emergency. There's a recent ecological emergency in the city as well, but prior to all of that, prior to the Green Capital Year, there was a really strong emphasis on partnership as a key element in the work around the environment in the city. And that came to sort of being through a group called the Bristol Green Capital Partnership. And that network then were heavily involved in the work ongoing that is now taking place with the SDG Alliance and with the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals in the city. And that legacy organisation has been really key to the work that we've done in Bristol. And so the green work kind of started with a momentum around trying to become a European green capital and trying to learn from other cities and draw into that network, but also then evolved into a key partnership and a key way of working within the city that's developed over the last 10, 15 years of actually trying to break down some of those silos and improve the way that we work together as a city that actually, given the Sustainable Development Goal 17 around partnership for the goals, has been a really key driver in the way that we've worked on the SDGs in Bristol.
That's great. Wow, 7 or 8 years. It sounds like you were preparing to apply to host the Olympics. That's a long process. And I'm so glad you brought up partnership because that's really the only way that the SDGs are going to get achieved. And so, to my favorite question, and the reason we're talking today, why are the Sustainable Development Goals important for cities? I mean, this is a national level initiative that was started at the UN.
So I'm sure from all the other guests that you've had on and all the other people you've spoken to, you'll have heard much of this already. But I think one of the key things is that cities are where the goals become real. It's where people are able to engage with this global agenda that otherwise they wouldn't necessarily have any reason to connect to. It's where they're able to understand the implications of their local decisions on national and global and international agendas and frameworks, and it's through that common language that we're able to share, a small community project in Bristol and the work that's going on there on an international stage and with friends and compatriots around the world to help them understand how they could roll out something similar. It's the way that we're able to, as a city, work alongside some of the global big hitters like New York and Los Angeles, and it's a way that we're able to partner with those cities and learn from and share our learnings with them. It's just as a framework, it helps us to break down those silos that often are the ways that cities have been working in the past, and it helps us to really see that interconnected framework that we want to be working towards, and it provides a vision for the future that we want to be living in. And as cities are where increasingly large numbers of the world's population live, if we want to be achieving these goals, we need to be working on them in cities. And if we want to be working to improve the lives of the people living in these cities, if we want to be meeting these goals, it's got to be done at the city level, because otherwise it's just too disconnected, too out of touch from the people that it's affecting.
Very well put. Thank you. And you talked about the SDGs as a way for envisioning and making happen a better future. And I think within that broader spectrum, there's a lot of buzzwords thrown around. So I want to ask you to differentiate or maybe compare two similar concepts, which is resilience by itself and then the Sustainable Development Goals. So how do you see the difference between them?
I think from our perspective, or at least from my perspective, resiliency is about response to a shock, and sustainability is about being able to continue and being able to move forward. And I think the way that I see sustainability done well is with resiliency inbuilt in it. So to build a sustainable society, you have to be resilient. But if you're aiming just for resiliency, then you're not necessarily going to meet sustainability. And actually, if we're aiming for sustainability instead, and we do that well, then I think actually we will end up with resiliency built into it. If as a society, if as a world, we're able to build systems that are truly sustainable, that truly care for the most marginalized, that truly look after those who have been left behind and try to improve their lives, if we're truly building a society that thinks about the way that we impact on the planet as well as people, as well as the places that we live in, then actually we will be building a resilient society in a way that otherwise we wouldn't be.
That's a great way to describe the relationship between the two. And as you said, resilience is just one aspect of sustainability. And within the actual Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17. They're all important. But if you had to choose 2 or 3 top priorities for Bristol right now.
That's so difficult. And I think the most difficult part of it is that actually in my work, I'm constantly advocating to make sure that we don't just pick out 1 or 2 that are stand out, or cherry pick the best ones or the ones that we're working on. But
yeah, we're making very clear that they're all important. But maybe you could talk about some aspects you're most proud of.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what I've been really proud of recently as a city is the way that under the leadership of Mayor Marvin Rees, we've really begun to grapple with some of our history of inequality that the city represents. You may well have seen some of the stuff on the news about what's been going on around Black Lives Matter in Bristol, and the history commission that we've set up to try and think through some of the history and the sort of the awful past that the city has had with its engagement with the slave trade. and its heavy involvement in that. And actually, I think one of the key issues that we've been working on as a city anyway, prior to all of that, was about tackling inequality, and that's racial inequality, but that's also social inequality within the city. Bristol's often been described as a city of two halves, and can be seen in a lot of the data when you disaggregate that actually, it's one of the most wealthy cities in the UK, but also one of the most socially divided, and has some of the poorest neighbourhoods in the UK as well. So goal 10 around inequality and reducing inequality is a real driver. It's a real focus, I think, for the city. I think alongside that, there is a real drive to be environmentally sustainable, to try and meet some of those bold climate ambitions that we've set out in our carbon neutrality work as a city. And there has been a real step change in the way that we've worked as a city. We've set up an environment board for the city. We now have a Bristol Advisory Committee on Climate Change, and we've taken bold steps towards our carbon neutrality aims with our declarations, and also with our ecological emergency, and the way that we're trying to embed that into our COVID recovery. And I think actually taking action on climate change is another one, but trying to do that and trying to ensure that we do that with our economic development at the same time has been key. So goal 13, goal 8, both in there as key drivers. But one of the other things that's quite close to my heart and to the city, I think, has been some of our work around trying to tackle hunger in the city. There's been a real push trying to ensure that there's no child goes hungry. It's been a big campaign led by a number of the businesses and organisations in the city, with support from the mayor and from the city council. I've got quite a few close friends who are working to try and tackle that in various different ways, whether that be with food banks or with some of the more strategic work. And it's seen some real success and some real progress. With some of the COVID work, it's had to redirect and refocus, but there's been some real positive work going on in that area to try and ensure that actually, as a city, we're not the sort of city that allows our citizens to go hungry. People do have access to food. As a society, we are ensuring that people have opportunities to eat, which should be one of the most basic things. And I'm really proud of that. And I think that's something that, while it's still a big issue in the city, is something that we're working to try and tackle and try to end.
Thank you for sharing those inspiring initiatives that are taking place in Bristol. It's truly an inspiration to the rest of the cities listening out there. And okay, we can get back to all of this SDGs being equally important. And Bristol published a voluntary local review in 2019. And a little context, countries can measure SDGs at the national level with a voluntary national review. So for Bristol, what is the backstory there? Why did the municipal government decide it was important enough to localize the SDGs?
So I think the backstory starts, as I mentioned, with the SDG Alliance and the Bristol Green Capital Partnership. My role kind of came out of some of that work that was ongoing with the SDG Alliance. I worked alongside the Bristol Green Capital Partnership and the then CEO, Ian Townsend, and was working with them to try and improve the engagement with the SDGs in the city in the widest sense. So, as I said, some of that was with the City Council, but some of that was also with this network. And over the course of that year, 2018, we were trying to review how we'd set up the Alliance, how that had worked, and try and share some of our learnings for other cities to understand how you could develop a similar stakeholder network of interested actors. And produced that report around the same time that New York were sharing their first voluntary local review in 2018. And actually, we'd done a fair bit of work thinking about some of the data behind the SDGs in the city. We'd engaged in a number of our organisations in the city, key institutions like our Chamber of Commerce and our environmental network and our voluntary sector networks. And actually, we began to think as an alliance, as a network, that there was a lot of the building blocks already in place for us as a city to undertake a VLR. And there was a lot of opportunity there to try and provide something for the city that helped them sort of grapple with what this actually meant, ground the SDGs more tangibly in the city with some metrics and some case studies. And so actually what we wanted to do was work through that as a city and try to draw from our networks and pool that resource to provide something meaningful around the SDGs. And so we began applying for different pots of funding and for some different opportunities to see whether there was any interest in the city to produce a VLR. We received a lot of impetus and energy and momentum, but no funding for a little while. We then began thinking about what the utility of it would be, and we've set up a thing in Bristol called the City Funds, which is trying to tackle some of the issues we have in the city, provide investment funding and grant funding to do that. And there was real interest in trying to baseline some of the metrics of that in the SDGs. We had our One City plan that was launched in 2019 in January. And again, similarly, we really wanted to tie those up together with the SDGs and use some of the data from both of those to do that. And so the sort of momentum swelled and grew. And eventually we were able to get some funding from the University of Bristol, from the Economic Social Research Council, to undertake some of this work around data, both qualitative and quantitative data. That actually, funnily enough, was also aimed to feed into the UK's national review at the same time. Unfortunately, because of some of the timescales, we weren't able to feed in as directly as we wanted. We'd hoped to kind of have the VLR as a more substantial case study in there, but it wasn't fully completed by the time the VNR was prepared. But we ended up producing this VLR, the first city in the UK to do that, and one of the first in Europe and in the sort of early cohorts globally. And I think for us as a city, it was a really important engagement opportunity to increase the awareness of the SDGs in the city, both internally within the council, beginning to have some of those discussions with different services and different directorates within the council about what the SDGs meant for them, but also externally with other groups, with communities, about what the SDGs meant to their own organisations and the work they were doing. And so actually within our VLR, we had representation from a small group, in a community organised group in the north of the city that was working to clean up one of the local streams and remove pollution and waste from that river, all the way up to some of the large law firms we have in the city, talking about some of their diversity and inclusion work and how they're improving access and pathways to the legal career for some of the deprived backgrounds and ethnicities of the city. And so it was a really important tool for us as a way of communicating the breadth of engagement that could happen with the SDGs, as well as beginning to de-silo some of the work that was already going on.
You mentioned that New York City was one of the first cities to complete a VLR. And I'm not exactly sure of this, but Bristol was probably the second in the whole world, if not very close. So my question is a follow-up to what we just talked about, which is, how did this come about in Bristol? This is not commentary on Bristol itself, but punching above its weight in terms of, it's a city of, I think, about 500,000 people, whereas New York City is, several times larger, several million, and obviously there's huge cities all around the world. So you talked about the SDG Alliance, but who really pushed for this? Did it come more from City Hall? The young people like yourself, I know that you were coming out of university probably at the time in your master's. So who really advocated to do this?
So I think, in fairness, we were probably the 7th or 8th city rather than the second, unfortunately. There were 3 or 4 in Japan that produced similar reports at the same time as New York. Helsinki beat us. And I'm always a big advocate of Los Angeles, and they produced a similar report, Buenos Aires, and 1 or 2 others as well. But we were in the sort of early cohort, as it were. It probably was a mix of the alliance as well as then the mayor being interested. We were fortunate to have political backing. Having Marvin Rees on board really added weight to the work that we were already undertaking. But using that network of the SDG Alliance was probably the key driver, if I'm honest. That alliance has been really important in demonstrating the commitment within the city to the SDGs. I think there's an element of goodwill and fortune about it, in that actually, it occurred around the same time as some work that was already going on to think about some of the wider city strategic vision and what is our direction as a city. And the SDGs provided a really good framework for thinking about that, and a really good milestone within that. The One City plan that we've developed has a set long-term vision for the city to 2050. And within that is the key embedded delivery of the SDGs as a milestone. And so actually understanding how that fits is really key to what we want to do. But actually, on top of that as well, Bristol's always been a sort of slightly subversive city. We've got Banksy in Bristol. There's always we're trying to innovate, and we're trying to work in a different way and trying to learn from others. And actually we saw the VLR as a great way to do that, to learn from other cities, to sort of punch above our weight a little bit, and to try and showcase some of the great work that's going on in the city. So I think that's probably why. And I think we were just willing and eager to be involved in this global picture and to actually demonstrate that Bristol as a city is connected. We've got a really diverse international population. There's something like 180 different languages spoken in the city and over 91 countries of origin in our city. And so we're an international city as it is. And it's really powerful to be able to say that we're working on the same framework as, some of our Somali community or some of our Jamaican community, some of our Polish community. We're all in this same common framework trying to tackle these similar targets. And actually to be able to demonstrate that with the SDGs is really significant.
Completely agree. And now post VLR number 1, I should say, what were the key takeaways from the VLR coming out of the report? And do you think this is something Bristol will continue every few years?
One of the first things we found was around data. Actually, we do still have a number of data gaps that we want to be filling. And we've been working recently with Los Angeles and with the Office for National Statistics to think around some of the data and the way that we present data. Particularly, we don't want our VLR just to be a static document. We don't want it to be something that just sits on a web page and you download and read. We want it to be something that's evolving and developing. And so we're looking into and working with the ONS to develop a platform, both for us as a city, but also for other UK cities to think about how they present their data and also how they present case studies and how they present the examples of what's going on in their cities. So that's one of the things we're looking into is how we can share some of that. We're also looking to plug some of those data gaps, think about how we can be working better with partners in the city to try and find some more of the data that we're interested in. It was a relatively short turnaround on our VLR, and if we have more time and more resource behind that, we're hoping to try and actually dig a bit deeper and find some of those extra indicators and some of those better case studies and build out some more, flesh out the report a bit more into fully reflecting that. I think one of the other key takeaways is that actually the engagement process is really important. How you engage people, how you connect with people really allows you to then grow the interest and awareness of the SDGs. And as we've thought about how we want to recover from COVID, how we want to build back as a city, that's been something that we've been really keen on doing, is engaging around the Sustainable Development Goals, speaking to some of our key partners about how they're working on the SDGs and trying to help them understand what the work they're already doing will be towards meeting those goals as well. And so as we're going forward, we're working with a number of the organisations in the city to try and help them to embed that further in their own work. We're also working closely with the City Council to think about some of the spatial planning in the city and how the SDGs will feed into that. Working at a local, within the city boundaries context, but also within a regional context as well with some of the other local authorities around us to try and embed the SDGs into some of that work. And then, as you say, we're looking into what a VLR will look like next year or the year after and what that can be. And I think there is interest in producing one. There's a real keen awareness that actually, the data that's within our VLR is only as good as the most recent update. And actually, if we want to be driving progress towards these goals, we need to be refreshing and reflecting that in a new document and using that document as well. So it's not just about having a glossy document that we can wave around, that we can take to the UN or to the UK government or whatever it may be, but it's also about using the data and the information we've collated in this document to try and drive some progress. And so we're working to figure out what that looks like, and we're working to try and think about what other focuses for our VLR. And I know next year's high-level political forum is going to be focused on some of the recovery from COVID work and how can we use that as a way to focus our VLR or focus some of the work that we're doing at the moment. And that's something we've already been trying to do, and we're embedding the SDGs in our recovery work. But we want to try and make sure that what we report and what we're sharing is really transparent and does that well. And so that's some of the ongoing process. But yeah, as I say, I think there is interest in another VLR. It's just still to be worked out.
Great. I look forward to not only reading, because you said you don't want it just to be a static document. So I look forward to engaging with the next VLR. And obviously you've learned so much from the first time around. So I'm curious, has Bristol been able to share what it has learned both about the SDGs as a local framework and about the actual process of carrying out a VLR with other cities?
Yeah, so I think we've been really keen to try and do that. And I think we've worked quite closely with different tiers of government and governance to try and ensure that others are able to learn from us. And I've had numerous calls with cities all around the world, ranging from speaking to some of our twin cities that we have in Bristol, so Bordeaux and Bilbao and Guangzhou, some of that network that we've got, but also then speaking with some of our national within the UK, with other local authorities and cities and groups within the UK that are interested in learning about the SDGs and what we've done in Bristol. We wrote a handbook to try and help UK cities understand how they can take on a VLR and what the data side of things looks like for UK cities, but also to try and help other cities around the world. We're part of the Brookings SDG City Leadership Network that exists as well, trying to learn from each other and share our learnings with those other cities, so that as a vanguard in the front end of some of the SDG localization process, we're bouncing ideas off each other and improving and refining our own work. We're also working with Eurocities, which is a network of European cities, to try and part of the SDG task force that they've got there, to try and help other cities understand what localization means for them. We've spoken with cities, as I say, all around the world to learn from and also share with. So just a couple of weeks ago, I spoke with the city of Cascais in Portugal, but we also in the process of developing our VLR. We spoke to Santana di Parnaíba, we spoke to New York and Los Angeles and Helsinki, and we've really worked, and Yokohama, and also to Kitakishu, and we really worked to try and pull that information and try and reflect all of that in our VLR to learn from the different cultures and contexts and reflect that in the way that we worked without losing our own context as well. And so I think we've continued to do that. We've attended a number of meetings, shared and presented on webinars. We've been involved with some of the UN DESA work around their production of a VLR handbook. And we've also been involved with a number of the other networks and worked. Well, we actually, in September last year, we were out in Düsseldorf sharing some of our work with some of the German municipalities, as well as then through one of the European research and innovation programs around iCapital, the capital of innovation. We shared some of our SDG work there as well. So there's a whole range, and that's kind of probably just the top surface level stuff, but it's one of the key things we're trying to do. And actually, we've put this work in and this effort in to try and lower the bar for other cities to engage. And that's been one of the key things that we've always said. And as we've spoken with other cities that are trying to do the same thing, that's been one of the key things. It's not about us retaining all this information and stopping other people. It's about partnership and working in partnership and learning. And that's been one of the brilliant things about this whole approach has been the opportunity to share and to learn with others. And I think that's what you see in the process of the VLR and in the VLR declaration that New York have been heading up. Actually, it's not just the one city that wants to waive a report. It's about actually improving the way that we all work as cities around the world and the way that we network and engage with each other.
Yeah, it's about action, right? We're trying to create better futures and actually achieve this 2030 agenda. And I am so happy to hear that cities are keen to work together and support one another. And it sounds like an open invitation for other cities to reach Bristol.
Yeah, go for it, 100%.
That's so great. And of course, the SDGs are not, as we said a million times now, not just something to be reported on and put on the shelf. They're very action oriented, and it's about getting out there in the community. So in Bristol, have you been engaging the public in SDG related projects, or at least educating citizens and raising awareness about Agenda 2030?
Yeah, so we've got a number of projects we've been working on, and a lot of this has come through the way that we work with our city office. So that's one of the, as I said earlier, it's a long-term partnership organisation where we're trying to coalesce the city around a common vision. And I'll just pull out one example from there around a project we've been working on, but then also another example around education and what's going on in the city around that. So one of our priorities for 2019 was actually around period dignity for the city and tackling the issue of period poverty. So that was a program that we worked up, working with school children and with teachers and educators to try and improve the awareness of the fact that, there's still at times a sort of almost a shame around the issues of periods and menstruation. And actually, we wanted to try and raise that and raise the profile of that issue so that those children who've had to miss out on school or had to skip classes because of that don't have to feel like it's such a taboo subject. And so we've been working with a number of schools to do that, but also at the same time, there was an educational campaign, and there was also a sort of distributional campaign as well to try and improve access to sanitary products for women across the city. And so we ran a number of banks where women could go and collect free sanitary products. And that's something that we rolled out in all of our council buildings, but also in a number of partners. And we set up a distribution network. And that's been really important for us as a city in demonstrating some of our progress towards SDG 5 and some of the work that we've been doing to try and reduce the gender inequality within our city, and also to tackle poverty as well. So it's an intersectional issue that we've been working on, and one that we've been trying to work with, both with children and young people, with businesses, with organisations across the city to change the topic and to move from period poverty to period dignity, and to shift that taboo. And so that's been a really inspirational campaign that's been led by one of my colleagues, Annabelle Smith, and then by one of the councillors, Councillor Helen Godwin. But then one of the other things we've been doing in the city around education has been through a network that we've got, through the SDG Alliance network. We have an organisation called the Global Goals Centre that's sort of begun to emerge. And that is a group that are trying to provide an interactive education centre for the city. And so they've been working quite closely with a number of schools in the city to try and help schools and school children understand the global implications of the local decisions that they make. And so we've just received some funding for that, and that centre it's sort of trying to be an interactive space where school kids and also citizens can actually come and engage and grapple with the ideas behind the goals. So you go into your bathroom or your toilet and you see the impact of the things that you buy and the plastics on the ocean, and it's providing a real physical way of understanding the decisions we make and how that works, and thinking about some of fast fashion and thinking about some of the issues around fair trade and all sorts of those issues that are interconnected across the SDGs, and how actually, as a citizen of Bristol, as a local person here, the decisions we make do have an impact elsewhere. And so it's trying to connect the citizens up to this global agenda through the language of the SDGs and through the targets and the goals. And so that's sort of something that's been going on. And actually, it's, even despite COVID, has seen some real successes over the last couple of months with a big engagement with schools over lockdown around a creative design campaign they've been running around, what are the most important SDGs for our cities? What does recovery look like around the SDGs? But also recently we've just received, as I said, funding to deliver one of these first initiatives around fast fashion and how the issues of fast fashion are something we need to be grappling with.
It makes me think of the quote, "Think global, act local." And it's fantastic that you're getting that message across to students in Bristol. So obviously it's the year 2020, and that means we've entered the decade of action on Agenda 2030. That means we have 10 years to achieve these goals. It's no secret that even before COVID, the world was behind where it needs to be. It's not on track to achieve the goals. And with the pandemic in mind, how can cities specifically step up to accelerate achievement of this agenda? And what are some of the obstacles that cities face in effectively contributing?
I think in the first instance, there's an element of a lot of what cities are doing will already be meeting these goals. It's about connecting up what's going on. It's about linking up the work that's happening and bringing together the right organizations and people within those cities to understand how the implications of the projects they're delivering play out in other areas and other services. And as you develop that improved communication and connection, actually the system will change in itself. As we begin to plan in the ways that we build our cities and the ways that we develop our cities and the ways that we think about people and the ways that we try to factor in the environment, actually as we do that, as we actively think through the goals and the use of the goals and think about the ways that they overlap, the positive interactions and the positive knock-on effects will help to speed up the process. But actually it does take starting somewhere. And I think sometimes people see this giant agenda of 17 goals and they think, well, what am I supposed to do? How do I engage with this? And actually, it's almost a case of start where you are. Once you're working on it, once you begin to consider the framework, and then you open the door on the thing that you're most interested in, and then there's this 16 other SDGs out there that you can then begin to consider and think about the interactions with. But if you don't open the door, you don't even begin that conversation. And so I think it's really important to recognize that they're all connected, but it's also important to start with something and to begin working somewhere. And too often, I think people push back on the SDGs because they seem too complex. But actually, once you begin to engage with them, once you begin to work on them, begin to use that common language, there's so many opportunities to learn, to roll out other schemes from elsewhere, to develop and partner with other places, and to work together towards this framework. And actually, that's the only way, as we said earlier, that's the only way we're going to deliver on this framework. So it's the only way we can really work towards it. If we want to see meaningful action and meaningful change, we need to step up, and we need to step up together.
Amen. And that's a great message to cities. Start where you are, but just get started. And I want to close with a question about young leaders. You and I are both 26 years old. Sorry to give your age away. But I want to talk about young leaders contributing to the SDGs. In your opinion, why is it particularly important for young people to not only know about the SDGs, because awareness is always the first step, but also actively contribute to their achievement?
So I think for us as young leaders, 10 years time is when these goals will need to be delivered, but it's going to be when we're in those sorts of leadership positions that actually are making those decisions. And we want to be handed on something that we can work with. We want to be handed on a world that actually does work for us. And we want to be handed on a world with systems in place that have been built over the last 10 years that are operating to the best of their capacity, that are thinking about those people on the margins, that are thinking about the ways that we interact with the planet. We want to have ecosystems and societies that flourish. We don't want to be living in places where we're having to deal with all the problems that have been building up for the past 10 years. I don't want to be cleaning out the muck of all the leaders at the moment. So for me, the action needs to come now. And I think that's where, as young leaders, we're not always in the position to make those decisions, but we are sometimes in that position to stick an elbow in the back of the leaders and, really give them a nudge in the right direction at least, or be campaigning to change things. Plenty of young leaders are able to actually have that innovation and that idea that changes the world and brings something different. And so many of the inspirational stories from around the world are from young leaders and from young people who have stepped up and said, I've seen an issue, I have an idea, I'm going to take that risk and take that step out and try it. And actually, I think that's the thing for a lot of people when they've been through the system and they've been working in the system for 10 or 15 years, they're not as willing or as ready to take those risks. Whereas I think often young leaders are the ones who want to step out and who want to say, you know what, I'm not jaded by any of this. I've not been affected by the system yet. I'm going to try and shift that system in the right direction. And there's a momentum and an energy around young leaders that isn't always there with some of our superiors. And I think actually, I've got a lot of, just to caveat that, I've got a lot of very inspirational leaders above me, and I'm fortunate to have that as the case. But I think, the challenge to young leaders and to young people is to step out, to take those risks, to innovate, and to sort of, where that's not possible, to be challenging the people above us, and to be standing up for the things that we believe in and standing up for society that we want to see.
You're right. We are not yet cynical. And I hope we keep that optimistic mindset. And I think another natural proclivity of young leaders we're really good with connecting around the world. And so I think, cities can take heed both to Bristol and young leaders around the world who very naturally look to their peers in Bristol or Chicago or Kigali or Melbourne, Australia, to lean on each other, support each other, and share what's worked and what hasn't, so we can make a better future for everyone, everywhere. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your insight.
Not at all. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.